Clyde Peters poked his head up over that little bump of sand in the sandbar and found that crocodile looking at him right in the eyes. And he didn't know what to do except send up a prayer, God help! And he whipped his 357 Magnum up and tried to kind of scramble up onto his knees, and before he could even aim the gun, the crocodile had turned like a flash and dove into the water. Clyde's heart was beating 1,000 miles an hour, and he decided he needed to show that he was still trying to be some kind of crocodile hunter, so he fired his gun after it a few times, but he was so nervous the bullets just went all wild. And then he heard a noise behind him. It was all the natives laughing at him. Oh, Gringo Capitan, you're a good crocodile hunter. Yeah, you are. He said, well, I guess I'm not. They said, next time you want to hunt crocodile, you come with us. Yeah, we go and hunt crocodiles with our spears. We kill many crocodiles. Oh, when do you do that? Oh, usually at night. No, thank you, he said. He was not going to go crocodile hunting in the darkness. And as he flew back home that day, Clyde was thinking to himself, I do love the song and the promise in that song about anywhere he leads me, I can safely go. But you know what? He wasn't leading me there. That was my pride. I was just trying to show off of how tough I was, but I should not have even tried to do that. Now, there were times that Clyde behaved that way, that he would go somewhere that God wasn't leading him very clearly. But there were other times, like the next story I'm about to tell you, where God led Clyde very clearly, where there was no question that God was showing him and telling him what to do. One time during his mission work there in the Amazon jungle, Clyde received a message that there had been an outbreak of pertussis in the village of Pauti. Pauti was another jungle village where there was an airstrip, and now recently living there was a young man named Rufino. Rufino had been a native who had come to the Yarinacocha school. He had learned about Jesus there. He'd grown up there. Now he'd gotten married. He had children, and he had decided to go to the village of Pauti to try to teach the people there about God, because they really hadn't been interested so far. So he was living there, and a message had gotten to Clyde that pertussis had started to outbreak there. Pertussis is also called whooping cough. And whooping cough is a really tough disease. You can die from it because you start coughing, and you get so much junk in your lungs that you can have a hard time breathing. And Clyde said, I need to go there. I need to try to help the people. We have medications that can help. So Clyde got his plane loaded up, and he took off. And shortly after taking off on the flight to Pauti, it started to rain. And rain and rain and rain. Now, it wasn't like too bad thunder or anything, so he could still fly his small plane through this rainstorm. But when he flew over Pauti to check the airstrip condition, he didn't like the way it looked. Anybody who flies a small plane, a plane that can be knocked over by a stump or by just a log in the airstrip, they always check the airstrip before they land. They'll come, they'll see the airstrip down below, they'll fly over it, checking the conditions, then they'll circle around, and if they like the way it looked, they'll actually land. Well, he flew over it, and it looked like a mud bog. It looked like a swamp with so much rain and mud down there. He said, there's no way I can land safely there. I'm not going to land. I'll have to come back tomorrow when it's dried out. And he flew off. He did not come back. 10 minutes later, he heard the voice of his co-pilot saying to him, Clyde, we need to go back to Pauti. And he turned to talk to his co-pilot, and that's when he realized there was nobody else in the plane. He didn't have a co-pilot. It was just him. But it had sounded like his co-pilot, like a co-pilot, like, oh, Lord, is that you? He said aloud. There was no reply, but the impression was so strong that he turned that plane around. Okay, anywhere he leads me, anywhere with Jesus, I can safely go. Anywhere he leads me in this world below, anywhere without him, dearest joys would fade, but anywhere with Jesus, I am not afraid. And he went back, he went into the airstrip, coming down, and it was all muddy and lots of deep puddles, but he landed safely, and as he did, people came running out to the plane. Quite a few villagers, and Rufino was at the lead of the pack. And he got to him and he said, oh, Capitan Peters, I'm so glad you come. I'm so glad you come. We have been praying for 3 days for you to come because so many are sick in the village. My wife and children have the pertussis and they're coughing and I think they're going to die. And we were praying for 3 days for the plane to come. And when you came and you flew over the airstrip, we were so happy. And then you left and we were crying. And then I said to the people, I believe my God will bring him back. We don't have a radio here to call you, but I said, let's kneel down and pray right now for that plane to turn around. And you did turn around. And Clyde was able to save the people of that village with the medication, but more importantly, what had happened with that miracle of God clearly telling him to turn around, and in answer to the prayers of those people, caused many people in that village to decide they wanted to know a God who was that powerful and who loved and cared for them that much. Well, not all of Clyde Peters' adventures were in the air. It sounds as if he's a guy that just does stuff in the sky, flying and parachuting and so on, but he also ended up doing an adventure in the water. So Clyde lived at the Yarinacocha station, which is located next to the Yarinacocha River. And the Yarinacocha River, if you think of a river, us who live here in Wisconsin, we think of a river, we've seen decent rivers, and if you go out to like the Mississippi on the west coast of Wisconsin, the west shore of Wisconsin, the west border of Wisconsin, the Mississippi is kind of big, but Yarinacocha is a huge river, so huge in fact that they would sometimes, that the military would sometimes use it for testing out their planes the ones that could land on water. It was so huge that there was a legend among the natives that there was a monster, a huge monster living under the river, and that it could come up and swallow a pecky peck in one gulp. Some of the natives were pretty frightened of that. Well, the Peru Air Force had gotten a new plane. The United States had sent them a plane. It was a submarine hunting plane. It had $600,000 worth of electronics inside of it, and they wanted to test it out, so they brought it to Yarinacocha, and they were practicing landing and takeoffs in this plane that could hunt submarines. Well, Clyde was on shore about half a mile away from where they were out in the water, and he was doing some things at the dock by the mission station, and he saw the plane come in for a landing, and instead of landing like a plane should land on water, where it comes down and then flares and touches down on its what would you call them, skids, floats, on its floats, it came down a little too steep and it caught its nose and went poof right over. And he said, oh no, those guys are upside down in the water. So he jumped in a little powerboat he had, in a little pecky peck he had. It was a pecky peck. He went out there in a pecky peck, and he got there, and the three men who had been inside the plane had all gotten out, and the plane was still kind of on top of the water, and the men were saying, our electronic equipment, we need to save that. We don't even care about the plane, we just got to save the electronics in there. It's so valuable. We're going to get so much trouble with our commanding officer. But Clyde said, there's no way that we can get back in there. It's sinking. We can't do that. So he brought him back to shore, and the men were saying, oh, if only we had someone who could go out there and scuba dive and rescue our equipment. And Clyde said, well, I have scuba diving equipment. Clyde had recently bought scuba diving tanks and all the things you need to scuba dive. But he said, I've never learned how to use it. I just bought it because I figured it would be fun to try. That sounds like Clyde, doesn't it? Clyde's just like, I think this looks cool. I'm going to do this. They said, would you dive in there? He's like, I probably need somebody to help me learn how to use this equipment first. Well, the Peru Air Force heard about it, and they hired one of the other Seventh-day Adventists in the area, Dwight Taylor. He was the director of the Upper Amazon Division at the time, and he was an expert scuba diver. And they flew him out there to try to rescue the equipment. And he trained both Clyde Peters and Alfredo Kalbermatter, who had also bought a set of scuba equipment. Remember, Alfredo was the nurse who lived there at Yarinacocha. He trained the two of them how to dive. And they did dive down. It was 100 feet down in the water. And they found the plane. And they were able to get the electronic equipment out of the plane and up to the surface. And even though it was electronics, it was all encased in such a way that then it was still going to be able to be reused. And so the Air Force was very happy. Thank you so much for electronics. And Clyde said, what about the plane that's under there? They said, we don't have the resources or time to try to get a plane up from under the water. So we'll just let it sit there. But thank you for saving the electronics. That was the most important part. They left. Dwight Taylor left. And Clyde and Alfredo looked at each other and said, wouldn't it be great if we could still get that plane out of the water somehow? Well, they didn't have a lot of free time, but they decided every Saturday night after sundown, that was their one little vacation time they would usually have, and one little break at the end of the week. And so they said, we're going to go diving every evening after sundown on Sabbath and see if we can get that plane out of there. And they tried a few things. They tried taking some life rafts, they deflated them, they went down into the water, they strapped them to the bottom of the plane wings, they then ran an air compressor from the canoe all the way down, running a hose down, inflated the life rafts, and it only barely budged the plane. So then they tried taking oil drums and getting them under the water, which was very difficult to do, and they managed to get some down, and they couldn't get the plane to come up. And then they had an idea, how about if we just put hoses into the chamber of the actual cockpit, and we seal everything up in the plane. We make sure all the doors and everything are closed well, and we just pump air into the cockpit, and maybe that'll fill it up with enough air that it can come up. Well, it worked. It worked too well. Because as they were filling it up, the plane started to come loose from the mud, and Alfredo was down below, keeping the hose in there, and Clyde was up top running the air compressor, and all of a sudden, the plane flew upwards. It was laying upside down, and the nose came up, and it just went straight to the surface. with Alfredo hanging onto the hose, which was trapped inside of the plane. And Alfredo just rode it all the way 100 feet up. And the plane came up out of the water and cleared the water and then came over with a splash and landed on top of the water. It knocked Clyde's pecky peck over. He went into the water. The air compressor went into the water. It was just a huge mess. But the funny part was, there was a pecky peck of drunk natives crossing the river at that point. And they saw, under the full moonlight, the monster come out of the water and swallow Clyde Peters' pecky peck. And they went back to shore and spread the word. And for years afterwards, all the natives believed you never went out on the Arena Cocha when it was a full moon because a monster would swallow your pecky peck. But because they were able to rescue the plane and then bring it back to shore, they were able to give it back to the Peru Air Force. And Peru Air Force was so happy that it made the government very much more lenient and eager to support them. Now that was good because then the government was willing to help them and not be so tough on them about some things that they needed to get done. But at the same time, it also caused another problem. Now that the government knew that they were there and that they had this, and that Clyde was a really resourceful guy and that he was a pilot, they ended up trying to take advantage of that. Because about a year later, some terrorist guerrilla fighters who had basically were fighting against the government, they blew up a bank in one of the cities in Peru. They stole a lot of money from it and then they escaped into the jungle and the army was trying to capture them. So they sent out commando teams throughout the jungle trying to track them down. And one of those three-man teams showed up in a place called Navati. Navati is where there was an airstrip. And they were there at the same time that Clyde had to land in Navati because the storms were so bad, the visibility was so poor that he couldn't fly anymore. And as he landed on the airstrip, he saw three men coming up to him. Pistols, grenades on their belts, all sorts of big weapons strapped to their back, really tough looking guys in their boots, striding up to the plane. And when he opened up the cockpit door, the leader said, "Capitan Peters?" "Yes." "You are ordered to fly us to find the guerrillas who blew up the bank. We need you to take us to Gran Pajonal. That is where we believe they are hiding. It is a 20-minute flight from here. We know this because we have a map of where all the Seventh-day Adventist airstrips are located. You will take us to them so that we can capture and kill those guerrilla terrorists." And Clyde said, "Well, no, I'm a missionary. I don't transport military people around on military missions. And I'd be worried about like the natives being caught in the crossfire. If we land at Gran Pajonal and you spot the guerrillas hiding in the jungle there and you start shooting, what if the natives get hit? And then that ends up being like, oh wow, the Seventh-day Adventists brought people into our town to kill people, and then we get a bad reputation." And the commander looked at him and said, "You misunderstood me. This is not a request for a favor. This is an order." Clyde said, "Well, obviously I can't fly right now. Look, the weather's terrible. That's why I had to land here. So we'll have to see how it is by morning." Well, what do you think Clyde was praying for all night? For bad weather. "Dear Lord, if you don't want me to take these people, these commandos in my plane, then please send bad weather. Make it terrible weather so that they'll give up and find some other way to go." Morning, he woke up, he stepped out, and he looked, and a crystal clear sky. He could see all the way towards Gran Pajonal, which was right at the foothills of the Andes Mountains. You could see the Andes just beautiful about a few miles away in the distance. Okay, let's load up. So they got in the plane, the three tough guys, and Clyde Peters, and they took off. Clyde said a prayer before they left out loud. "Dear God, be with us as we fly today. May your will be done." He prayed in Spanish to make sure that they understood what he was saying. And then they took off. And as they took off, he said, "All right, gentlemen, I have fuel for 4 hours in this plane. It should only take 20 minutes to get to Gran Pajonal. We should be just fine." They got up in the plane. 2 minutes after takeoff, all of a sudden, the thickest fog bank that Clyde had ever seen rolled in, covering every part of the jungle that he could find. He flew one direction, the other. He couldn't find where Navati was that they had just left. He flew one way, he flew the other way, and he told the men, "I'm flying by instruments. That means I'm just using the dials on my cockpit to tell me this is how far I've gone, this is how high I am. I can't see anything. And we have Andes Mountains over there and some other bigger mountains on this side as well, too. If I crash into those mountains, we're dead." And the men started to look a little nervous, wiping their heads a little bit, getting a little sweaty. And he flew for an hour, for 2 hours, 3 hours, never seeing the ground, completely surrounded by fog, flying on instruments only. flying just in a zigzag pattern and circling back, just hoping something would open because he didn't want to crash into any mountains. And when he hit to 3 hours of flying, he said, "Gentlemen, we have 1 hour of fuel left, and I still don't see an opening in the clouds for us to get back down to the ground." And he looked in the rearview mirror of his plane, and he saw the men crammed in back there, and they were all pulling in their necks. They reached down and they pulled out crucifixes. They had these little crosses on their necks, and they're all pulling them out and kissing them and whispering things to them. And he said, "Yeah, it's a good idea to pray, guys, because we're going to be running out of fuel soon, and either we're going to then crash into a mountain or we're going to crash into the ground." And he looked back in the rearview mirror, and some of the guys were starting to wipe their eyes a little bit and kind of nervous. And then Clyde said, "I'm going to go ahead and pray again, guys. Lord, we only have 1 hour left, and if we can't find a place to land in 1 hour, we're going to crash in the mountains." And he heard a in the back. "If that doesn't happen, we're out of fuel and crash in the ground." And he heard from the back, "Oh." "So you take over, Lord. This is your plane, and if it's your will, we'll survive it." And then he heard from the back 3 men, 3 grown commandos, sobbing like babies. "Oh, God, I don't want to die. I don't want to die." One of them, "Oh, God, forgive me. Forgive me for how I treated my mother last week." And Clyde kept flying along. He was nervous too, but he wasn't sobbing because he was trusting that God was going to take care of him. And he was flying, and suddenly, as he was flying, he noticed just briefly below him, down below, a small opening in the clouds, maybe 200 feet across. And right below that, like looking down through a long telescope, he could see an airstrip, a hole that opened right over an airstrip. The airstrips were out there, but they were well scattered. This was a miracle that there was a hole right over an airstrip, the only hole he'd seen so far. And he banked to try to come around to it, and it was gone again. "Gentlemen, there was a hole, but it's gone. Everybody watch out the windows. If you see a hole again, we have to take it." And all the men were plastered up against the windows. "Where's the airstrip?" Oh. And then one of them called out, "There it is, there it is." Clyde saw it, and in a blink of an eye, he pulled the controls to cut the engine. He didn't want to go forward any further because it was directly below him. He cut the engine, he pointed the plane into a 90-degree down dive, started spiraling downwards, and in the background, he heard the soldiers crying and vomiting at the same time. Oh! And Clyde white-knuckled as he went down through this tunnel of cloud, going straight at the ground, hoping to get under the clouds before the clouds would close up again. This would be the last chance to get to an airstrip. The plane picking up speed as it dove, the wind whipping past, the men throwing up in the back, Clyde's knuckles white on the steering yoke. And we'll find out tomorrow what happened.